And welcome to APS webinars. The title of today's webinar is The Relationship Between Government and Industry, the first broadcast of 2021 for our Success in Industry Careers series. I'm Crystal Bailey, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. APS webinars are brought to you as a service of the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insight into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. Oops. APS membership gives you easy access to valuable career information and resources such as this webinar. It allows you to get your research out to the community and network with potential employers or colleagues at our meetings and have a greater impact about issues that are important to you through grassroots advocacy. It can also help connect you to a community of like-minded folks through participation in our forums, divisions, and topical groups. If you are not yet an APS member but value the things that APS provides, we would encourage you to please consider joining today. And there is information on how to join APS right there on the screen. Okay, now we're going to do just a little bit of housekeeping before we start introducing our wonderful panelists and moderator. So basically the way this is going to be structured is I will introduce our moderator and he will introduce the panelists, and then we will start with a few initial questions to kind of kick off the discussion, and then it'll be open to Q&A from the audience. So we want to have a lively discussion with lots of interaction from you. So the way that we are asking you to ask questions today is to use that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please don't use the chat. I cannot guarantee that we will see your question if it is in the chat. So we would prefer it very much if you would use the Q&A to ask your questions. You can ask them at any time. I'll be monitoring that. And so will Peter, our wonderful moderator. And if you need to adjust the audio settings, they're on the left. And this is being recorded, and you will be emailed the recording of this broadcast afterwards. We will also be sharing a link to a survey. If you could please fill that out and give us some feedback, we'll send that out to everybody at the end of the broadcast. Too many windows. Okay. I also want to tell you a little bit about some upcoming broadcasts. This is part of the APS Success in Industry Careers series, and we are very excited to welcome Peter back for 2 broadcasts over the coming months. The first one is Industry versus Academic Priorities in Publications and Presentations, Maximizing Your Strategic Opportunities. So that will be on February 23rd, again at 3 p.m. Eastern. And then in March, we have Understanding IP from Patents to Publications to Trade Secrets. So if you want to make sure you don't miss out on either of these, trust me, you don't want to, you can sign up if you haven't already for the aps.org, go.aps.org/APS webinars. That will allow you to sign up for different webinar series. So just go to that URL, make sure you check Success in Industry Careers, and you'll never miss a broadcast from this series. Okay, now with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Peter Fisk, who will introduce our panelists. Hi, say hi, Peter.
Hello, everybody.
So in addition to being an excellent speaker, coach, and author on careers and professional development topics for scientists, Peter is also executive director of the National Alliance for Water Innovation, or NAWI, a coalition of national labs, universities, and companies dedicated to developing technologies for distributed desalination and water reuse. Before this, Peter worked as director of the Water Energy Resilience Research Institute at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. He led 7 early-stage clean tech companies through product market fit, customer discovery, market segmentation, and analysis, and started a few companies of his own. Early in Peter's career, he also served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for special projects for the DoD as a White House Fellow under the Clinton administration. So Peter has had a really varied spectrum of experiences and is a great person to moderate this panel. So Peter, take it away.
Thank you very much, Crystal. And hello, everybody. Welcome to our discussion today. And let me just kick it off right now. Next slide, please, Crystal. So we have 3 panelists. We have 2.5 panelists. We are still trying to track down our 3rd panelist. He is phoning in from a secret location deep inside a mountain somewhere, so we will find him. But first, let me introduce Robert Ludwig from Microchip Technology. Robert is going to talk to us a little bit about his background, in particular his work in a small business and interactions with the federal government. Next slide is I would love to introduce Don Meekhoff. Don is presently at Lockheed Martin, but has had a rich experience with a variety of professional roles in both national labs environment as well as research. And at every stage, it has always involved a laser. Finally, we are trying to track down our third speaker, Yun, and we're going to try to get him on as close as possible. But until we do, we're going to go on and talk to Don and Robert. So guys, thank you very much for joining us today. And I guess I'd like to have each of you tell us a little bit, just to 3 questions. Where you grew up, where you got your degree, and what specific area in physics, and then finally a little bit about where you are today and the job you do today. So Robert, how about you first?
Sure, but I may throw in a 4th question.
Excellent.
So I grew up primarily in Akron, Ohio, and I went to Miami University in physics, and then I went to MIT for grad school, got my PhD in atomic, molecular, and optical physics in 1997. I did a postdoc at NIST, and then I got a job building atomic clocks at a company then known as Datum. And I spent almost 15 years there, most notoriously developing the chip-scale atomic clock with DARPA funding.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2013, I quit and I went to DARPA, and I spent 4 years as a program manager at DARPA in physics, photonics, and MEMS programs. And then I went to work for the Air Force. I was, I don't remember what it's called, chief scientist for position, navigation, and timing at the Air Force Research Lab in Dayton, Ohio. And then, having risen to the point in management where I wasn't doing anything but managing anymore, I came back, and the company that I used to work for has been bought 4 times since then. It's now a tiny little sliver of the giant Microchip technologies. And now I work as I'm not management. I have nobody working for me. I'm back to being a bench scientist. I twiddle on clocks and electronics and firmware and atoms and mirror mounts again, which at least for the time being is preferable to management.
Very good, very good. What was your 4th question? You said you wanted to ask if you would respond to a 4th question.
I also told you how I got from there to here.
No, very good, very good, very good. Thank you. Well, Dawn, tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where you got your degree, and what do you do today at Lockheed Martin?
So I'm from Washington State in California originally, and I did my undergrad at Caltech in California, and in physics, of course, and got my PhD at the University of Washington in atomic physics. And so after that, you'll know some similarities with Robert. After that, I went and did a postdoc, although I was at NIST Boulder, working in ion trapping there and quantum computation. Mm-hmm. I continued at NIST with a position there, doing primary frequency standards, so making the NIST F1, the atomic clock. Well, it's a frequency standard that then interfaces with atomic clocks at the Naval Research Lab. Those kind of details matter to the likes of me and Robert, but it's similar bench work with lasers and getting the lasers to work all day long. And so that arc has followed through my career, but at each step, it got a little more applied. Mm-hmm. And even my position at NIST on the staff there was a little more applied, making the US primary frequency standard. After that, I did move to back to Washington State, and I was actually at a telecom startup developing lasers for a telecom startup. So that was a very different environment.
Yeah.
From there, the telecom boom happened. So from there, I moved to a small research company that did a variety of different types of research, always using lasers. And in the fullness of time, we were purchased by Lockheed Martin. So went from a very small company to a very big company. And at each step, the work became more and more applied.
Yeah.
And so I'm currently with Lockheed Martin.
Super. Well, so thank you both. And let's see, Crystal, have we found Yun yet?
So no,
Okay.
and we're not sure.
That's all right. We'll check
in the
in a few
audience
minutes
on the
and see if
phone,
he
or
can join us. Guys,
yeah.
That's fine. So let me kick it off and kind of say, it's so interesting. Both of you have some common themes, and I will promise you, given the expertise on our panel, that we will stop our webinar exactly on time. I promise. So don't worry about that. But the first of all, question for you, Dawn. It's interesting. Sometimes careers make sense, but only in the rearview mirror. But when you were in grad school, what did you think your career was going to be like?
I have to say, mostly I kind of followed my bliss a fair amount in life and just did what I was interested in doing. I was always interested in physics, even in high school. And I knew that it was not an unreasonable thing to get a PhD in physics. And I don't recall that I had my eye on a professorship. I think I did have my eye more on working for a company or for a national lab.
Cool. How about you, Robert? Did you, when you were in grad school, what was the future Robert in your mind?
Well, at the start of grad school, I thought I wanted to be a professor, and I think everyone does, in part because you don't know anything about industry or government, and you've got all these professors around you being self-important, and that makes you think that that's how you become important.
Right.
But the harsh reality is that in equilibrium, only one grad student per professor gets to be a professor. So there's kind of a rude awakening, I think, that hit all of us about our third or fourth year of grad school when we realized we weren't all going to be big-time professional physicists like our professors were, which worked fine for me. I did some TAing and I hated it. Turns out I don't really care whether around me learn or not. But also, I was doing this experiment to measure the 11th digit of the Rydberg constant. I spent 10 years in grad school trying to measure this 11th digit and realized along the way that I didn't care what the 11th digit of the Rydberg constant was. I was far more interested in the lasers and vacuum systems and atom optics that we were using to measure it.
Yeah.
I've always been much more of a gearhead. I've always been, a car guy. And so I was far more interested in building things and making them work. So by the time I finished grad school, I knew I was headed for industry one way or another.
Interesting. No, that's great. Both of you kind of said, I think this is true. Both of you had a journey that has gone from more sciencey to kind of more applied. So Dawn, tell me a little bit about that journey. What's it like? Yeah.
One of the things that surprised me, sort of in retrospect about my career, how it all sort of all day long has always been get the laser to work, no matter what the final.
Every job. Right.
And my my thesis for my PhD was a pure physics question. We were trying to answer a question where the answer, about the universe, that last constant wasn't known, the last digit on that constant. And similarly, I am at heart, I enjoy tinkering in the lab. But I know that, now I know that one of the things that happens, and Robert alluded to this, is as you get more senior, which also does mean a higher pay grade, you're managing people, whether you're managing them as a professor or you've got a team of people working for you. In a big company, I had a team of people working for me, not direct reports, but sort of my electrical engineers and my mechanical engineers working for me. So there's an interesting set of similarities, and that really. So the similarities are that in the end, as the career goes farther along, your goal of trying to get the lasers to work, or whatever thing it is you're trying to get to work, whatever skills you've brought to whatever task was to answer the questions that you were working on in your PhD, a lot of those skills translate to doing many other engineering style things at a company.
Huh.
There's an interesting set of skills though that I found surprisingly common, that I would say common to academia and industry, that they don't teach you in graduate school. You know, basically
Like
working
what?
with people, working on a team, having somebody give you a goal and having the whole team work towards the goal and not doing something else that they don't want. And then a big key one that I got out of mostly in my career, but is a big deal, either academia and sometimes industry, is funding. How do you get the funding for the things that you want to do?
That's always a common concern and a common feeling in academia, like you're constantly on the treadmill to generate grant dollars to fund your research, et cetera. But that's really interesting, Dawn. So Robert, did you're sort of like a Bilbo Baggins. You've gone there and back again. So so when you were moving in towards more applied and more managerial roles, what skills did you take from your PhD that you found useful? And as Dawn said, what new kind of skills did you have to kind of develop along the way?
Well, I think I may speak for a large body of physicists that we got into physics because we don't handle people well. And certainly I confronted that as I rose in my career. You know, whether you're in a company or in government, they're always looking to promote you. And
why is that? Why do you think that is?
Because they always need to fill positions.
Okay.
And that's where they look, and they'd rather hire someone who already knows the system and the place or whatever, the technology, whatever it is, they're looking to promote that person and then backfill. So you have young people coming up who gain the expertise. So there's a natural career trend. And, you know, I got sucked into that. And, you know, part of that is where you are in life. I had children I had to pay for college, and so money looks good. But I can say that now that my kids are through college and I have enough money.
Yeah, you're not going to give them any more money. You might as well just do what you love.
Not giving them any more money. But I think that you know, so again, for now at least, I'm enjoying being back in the lab and tinkering and not having to deal with people. In fact,
so you can go back.
Pandemic, I'm sitting at home and tinkering here at home, and all I have to do is send data to the management, and they're happy.
Awesome, dream come true. Well, Dawn, you know, you mentioned the fact that you know, both of you have had a career explicitly that's going sort of in and out of government and industry, and government and industry. So can you tell me a little bit more about that dynamic? You know, what is it? Are they the same jobs in like the Navy Research Lab as compared to at Lockheed Martin, or are they fundamentally different? Or is it natural for people to go in and out as Robert did? Tell me a little bit about that. The
particularly
similarities.
Yeah, so it is natural for people to go back and forth if they're particularly doing real research within both the Lockheed Martin and also at the small company I was at that was doing where the funding at a small company for research was these SBIR grants. And so
tell me what SBIR stands for. Do you know?
Yeah, so SBIR is a special program where it's actually money earmarked for small companies with the idea that small companies can have innovation happen more readily, which it turns out is really true.
Yeah.
I was surprised how true that ended up being in my experience as we have transitioned from developing some great technology in the SBIR so that we were useful to Lockheed Martin and then getting purchased by Lockheed Martin and seeing how differently things work at a large company.
Yeah.
And so at the research level, there is in fact people who have gone back and forth from different labs, particularly, you know, in the case, well, see, in the case of this particular technology we work with, Robert and I with the lasers. The lasers was one of these glorious things that came out of, pure curiosity
Sure.
physics research
right.
so long ago that everybody was saying for quite a while, this was going to be the next best great thing for everything. And it kind of happened these past decades.
It's happened, but like Arthur C. Clarke said, that technology, technology innovations are overrated in the short run, but underrated in the long run. That they take time to manifest into something, and the next day you're scanning a pair of socks over a laser, and you're
But so for me, it was the applications that I moved through included some things all sort of all over the map in terms of primary frequency standards, atomic clocks, and I even had a little NIH grant for a laser neurostimulator at one point. But there is a gravitational pull from the Defense Department, where quite a lot of the funding for the research is in projects that the Defense Department is interested in, and so the time that even when I'm at the SBIR, the small research company where we did a variety of different things, a lot of those fundamentally came from questions that the Defense Department wanted answered.
Interesting. So Robert, did you also ever have any encounter with SBIR funding or any other, like, applying for grants, even though you're working in a company environment?
So I've never worked for a small business. I certainly had plenty of exposure to SBIRs as a program manager at DARPA.
That's true. You were on the receiving end of all these applications.
If I can get back to your original question, though, I could comment on that.
Please.
On the government side, most of my experiences with DoD, a large fraction of their R&D is contracted to vendors. But they
What do you mean by vendors? The vendors, that sounds like somebody with like a push cart and a bunch of popsicles.
Lockheed Martin or Microchip or...
So these are private sector companies.
Private sector companies. Yeah. And DoD needs to be able to manage them effectively.
Right.
And so DoD needs smart people. If they're going to run an atomic physics program at Lockheed Martin, they need
better
an
have
atomic physicist on the government side to serve as the program manager.
Yeah.
And you don't get good scientists unless they're also doing science. And so as a result of that, most of the technologists who work at places like NRL and AFRL and ARL, they're doing their science job for let's say half the time, and then half the time they're serving this government role of managing the external vendors. Yeah. Reading the reports, making the comments,
managing other people's projects,
doing source selection, deciding who to give the money to, and so on. And so I'd say that is one distinctive difference between working in the two sectors. I mean, if you are a physicist who's got some interest in management and wants to have the broad horizon of, being part of a billion-dollar weapons development program, that's a great way to do it. You've got your science that you're doing, pursuing your interests, or let's say your projects, but also serving this management role as well. Whereas in industry, where the only thing that matters is money, they're going to do everything they can to make sure that their physicist is doing physics all of the time. And so
and specifically physics that's relevant to whatever the company's business is and products are. Yeah.
Right. But I'd say, if you're working at, say, AFRL, you might spend, 50% of your time actually doing the science. Whereas in an industrial position, they're going to spend the money to make sure that you're doing science 90% of the time.
All the time, because that's what you're hired to do. That's interesting.
Right. They're going, whereas in government, the mission is not saving money or making money. The mission is achieving the mission of the department. And so you do whatever needs to be done to support that mission.
So Dawn, you talked a little bit about some of the things that were sort of new challenges or new skills you had to develop. Thinking back on your time in grad school, was there anything that you would have done differently about either acquiring skills or a different experience or any advice you give to people who are in grad school now about preparing for this world in which you're going to potentially be managing as well as doing and overseeing as well as making the laser work?
I've always wondered if they've started having classes on things like how fundraising, how to write a grant proposal, and certainly the how to work on a team is a key skill that it's pretty hard to find a job where you don't have to work with other people.
We are a social species after all, and most of us have to collaborate.
Even in a pandemic, it's a little hard to find a job.
Yeah.
That's entirely. And so, I don't know if those things can be taught. One of the joys of graduate school is that a lot of times you give somebody a tough question, and all of the things you have to do to solve that tough question end up being skills that get used later on. For me, on the narrower side was learning how to figure out whether the electronics are working or not. Ended up being a skill that, as I've gotten more senior, as they say, at a higher position in a company, now I'm just talking to the folks who are doing that. But if you're a professor, you're also, again, going to be somebody who's just talking to the folks who are doing that. And so those skills are needed on both sides.
Very good.
I guess I would say just, I doubt those classes exist. I would say, but focus on those things. Don't think.
Hello?
And
hold on, Yun. I'll introduce you in a second.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You can hear me, right? Okay.
Yeah, we can, Yun. Thank you. Dawn, please continue.
Oh, I just say definitely paying attention to that working with your team and how you work with your team and how you understand where everybody else is at and what your boss or your thesis advisor wants from you. Pay attention to those skills. Those skills will serve you very well in the future.
Very good. Well, thank you for that advice. And now I'm pleased to say that calling in from the secret underground bunker hidden in a mountain somewhere we can't disclose, Dr. Yun Oh is joining us. Yun, can you hear us?
Yes, we can. I was on a mute the entire time, and I listened to everything, so I'm up to date.
Good.
I'm good. Yep.
Good. Well, maybe what we'll do is we'll just continue to jump right into the conversation, Yun, and I'll ask you the question I asked Dawn was, given that careers in physics often start very technical, very focused on science and focused on individual projects, and often evolve into the world of projects and project management. Can you tell us first of all a little bit about? You don't have to disclose your current location, but tell us a little bit about where you are, what your career is right now.
Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, it's not a secret. I'm actually dialing from Pentagon, so that's why we have sort of strict rules about video conferencing and dialing phone and everything. So
which
apologize,
ring?
I can't.
Which ring in the Pentagon? C ring.
Excuse me. E ring.
E ring. Okay, out there. Good.
Yeah. So So my what was I going to say? The question was my background.
Well, what you tell us about your job now? What do you do now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I work at the Office of Undersecretary of Defense in a modernization office in quantum science. We have modernization priorities. There's about 11 of them, such as quantum, hypersonics, AI, machine learning, and all that stuff. And one of the offices is quantum science, because DoD believes that it's one of the areas that we need to make advances to be competitive. So I work as a science advisor in this role. So I advise my leadership on some of the things that we should pursue, should not pursue, and make some sound judgment on some of the technologies that are evolving. Some are kind of there's a lot of hype, but not much use, and some have very a lot of uses, but underestimated kind of thing. So, I advise my leadership on that role. So I play that at this place.
Well, so I asked a question of Robert, and Dawn asked you too. When you were back in grad school, when you were thinking about your career, what was your vision for yourself back when you were in grad school? What did you think?
Okay, so I listened to all the conversation before, so I have to say I took a little different approach than most regular people pursued. That could be part of my experience when I was sort of in undergrad, slash, between grad kind of level. And one thing I noticed is, physicists are very smart people. They work very hard. They're one of the most rewarding people you want to hire. The only thing is that a lot of times these physics PhD, they often last like 7, 8 years, and they kind of work you to death. And I really didn't like that. I didn't want to go into physics not knowing what I was going to get into. So, for example, you go into a physics PhD program, and you're basically funded by your advisor's research. So you kind of have to do your advisor's research. And after you graduate, that will be sort of like your thing you'll do afterwards. That's like your specialty kind of thing. Yeah. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to take that. So if I want to go to grad school, I wanted to have my own funding and do the research that I want to do. So I kind of took a different path. So I went and got a job. I was working at NASA. And then they used their sort of scholarship program to go to grad school, and that was a good thing to do because like 2 years into it, I'm like, my life's gonna revolve around NSF funding, and that's just not so much fun. So I want to do more practical stuff. So I switched to and working for the Navy, and then I really got into atomic, molecular, and optical physics because there's a lot of application and something cool stuff you can do. So then I got into sort of the Navy scholarship program, and I got the funding to do and pursue the research that I want to pursue. So I have to say I'm a little bit not normal in the sense, not traditional, because I didn't go to grad school right away. I worked a couple of years to figure out what I want in my life. So, for me, this worked.
Well, that's great. But when you finished your PhD and then you embarked on your career, did you find, like Dawn and Robert, that you would move, to more and more managing and overseeing the work of others? Was that also sort of a experience for you?
That's a very interesting question. When I finished my PhD, I actually tried out teaching for a little bit because that's what most PhDs do. And I also agreed that I didn't like teaching very much. It's like, you got problems, to solve, but you got to solve other students' problems, and that was just my calling. So I did try teaching for about 3 years, and I didn't like that. So I jumped ship, and I was into the sort of like program management role. So the DoD has to distribute.
Robert. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of demand for people who are versed in a lot of technical skills to kind of oversee a lot of the projects because a lot of people. I mean, they propose some of these proposals. I don't know how they make these things, but you really got to sniff out some of the things that are like, snake oil salesman. So you don't have to be a professor to make a difference in academia or DoD. You could there's other ways other than being a professor.
That's great. That's good. That's good experience. So I'm noticing a whole bunch of questions coming in. So I'm going to go ahead, Crystal, and ask, or pull one of the questions from one of these people who asks, we understand where funding comes from to do research in grad school and research in academia, but where does the funding come from for businesses? And do businesses, for example, apply for grants? You mentioned SBIR. So is that how businesses get funded to develop their technology? Robert, tell us a little bit about, how your business and where did you get money from to do your work?
So we have several funding streams. We write proposals to DARPA and the Office of Naval
So you
Research.
never escape writing proposals in your life, huh?
No,
Oh, wow.
we write proposals to them. And then we have customers who come to us who want products that do something a little different than what they already do.
Okay.
And in many cases, we can carve out a bit of that to do a bit of basic research into the underlying physics of our devices.
Do customers sometimes come to you and say, we'll fund you to develop this new thing for us?
Sure. I'm working on a project right now where a customer would like us to improve the temperature sensitivity of one of our clock products.
Interesting.
And so that ends up actually being a good bit of atomic physics understand what's causing the temperature sensitivity in our products. Though I'll add that it also has elements of mechanical engineering and electrical engineering and firmware engineering, all of which tend to contribute to the temperature sensitivity.
Sure. Interesting.
But then we also get money internally. We have some long range vision money in the company, and we can write, we call it IRAD, internal research and development money. And so there's some pot of IRAD money, and we can apply for that, and we can write a proposal, and then a group of senior technologists in the company review those proposals, and we can get selected for some internal money that way. And that actually tends to be a little less applied because they're more likely to take a
More advanced
shot
concepts. Yeah.
than a customer is.
Yeah. So Dawn, is it the same in your organization? You had a small business which was eventually acquired by Lockheed Martin. So what were the ways in which you all funded the technical work that you needed to do?
The small business grants, almost when I was at Aculite, the smaller company, it was almost all SBIR grants, but a handful of grants then would follow on from those. And most of those were from the Defense Department. Most of those were for different laser applications. But we also had some NASA and some NIH grants. Within Lockheed then, where the stuff we're working on is more like a prototype of some of these lasers. And so in the research prototype space, you do get big contracts to build one-offs, one version that is something new that hasn't, a laser that has more power than any other laser of this size or that size. And those, so it's still, it's still a matter of, the defense, there's different industry days where they send out the questions that they want people to send in proposals for. And so there's still the funding situation in terms of finding out what the questions are and who's got funding to get those questions answered.
So I've heard from all of you, proposals. It never ends, So one of the things for me in grad school, I watched my advisor's life. I was like, God, that guy is writing proposals all day long.
Yeah.
And then I discovered actually, that's kind of what you do a lot. So,
well, I have to say, I personally got off with hardly ever writing proposals.
Is it so? Lucky you.
I contributed several times.
Sure.
But I was never the person on the hook, as you say.
Yeah, very good.
Except for a couple of little NIH grants I had. So and so that is one thing that happens when you go to a larger company is you're likely to not to be sort of sequenced into a smaller niche. And that might not be your issue.
Yeah. Somebody else writes in that I'm an international graduate student. So what kind of constraints or issues apply to my being employed, either in a research environment that involves the Defense Department or any of these other things? Can each of you, maybe Yun, can you speak to that first?
Yeah, sure. That's one thing I have to say. That's one of the limiting factors of a lot of the DoD efforts that we're trying to do is that some of these programs are like kind of classified, so it requires like a secret clearance levels, and one of the problem is a lot of the best and the brightest students that we have in the United States are foreign students. And it's really not fair for them to be turned down because of their citizenship status. But it's just
impossible, or is it just difficult?
Yeah, I mean, thing is, you have to get some kind of clearance to work even in a place like this, and with a foreign citizenship, that's just not possible. I think some of the researchers kind of work around it and affiliate it with like university. For example, NSA runs a quantum computing program in conjunction with the JQI in Maryland and also from NIST. So there are foreign students who work on those things, but it's sort of like, like a cheating around it. But
air gap for that.
Right. But work in a facility, a DoD facility, to be some kind of program manager requires this citizenship, and which is, I have to agree that that part is not relaxed at this point. It's still very stringent.
Yeah, Robert, have you ever had the experience of hiring a PhD who's a foreign national or not a U.S. citizen?
So I've seen it both in industry and in government in FFRDC, federally funded research labs.
Okay.
It's possible. It's difficult because
what makes it difficult?
Well, if you have controlled information on the premises, and you bring in a person who's not allowed access to that, then
they could walk away the wrong way around the building.
You need to. Everyone's got to know. You need to have computer systems that are set up so that some directories you can get to, and so. So it's certainly possible. I've seen it done in both environments, but it takes effort from everyone around to make it work. And so I'll say that the people who I've seen in these positions are all really good.
Yeah.
You know,
Interesting.
if you know, a
To-
mediocre US citizen could get a job in a DoD lab, which an international person couldn't. But, you know, if you're really good, then
they'll move heaven and earth to make it
then
work.
they will undertake the burden of having you in their facility and adjusting their systems and processes to make it possible.
Yeah, Dawn, do you have any other either advice for international grad students or experiences that you've had with respect to hiring or working with foreign national PhD physicists?
Yes, so it made a big difference for us when we were a small company, an SBIR, and a larger company. We went with Lockheed, and so while we certainly had several foreign nationals once we were acquired by Lockheed encouraged them strongly to just get citizenship.
Okay.
And I didn't get the impression that it was too hard for them.
I think Lockheed might have an ability to get people into the queue for citizenship in a way that a small business might not so much.
Yeah, I don't know.
Another thing you said, Dawn, was that a small business, you guys could be a little bit more, and if not flexible, you've still got to follow the rules, but you're small. And so that you can accommodate, and also a small business might be a place where a star performer from who's coming from another country might still have a lot of opportunity. So I'd say that's another area where international grad students should really consider, is that smaller businesses might be willing to move the furniture to make it possible for you to be successful. And eventually, who knows, maybe you get your company gets acquired like Dawn's company was acquired.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're a mover and a shaker, a lot of times you might enjoy being at a smaller company where you can make what you want to happen more readily.
Yeah, no doubt. Another person writes an interesting point that in academia, the combination of the fact that you have professors, what we call principal investigators, PIs, leading specific research, and then we have a publication, publications are the main kind of product where the contributions are very clearly laid out with the authors. And then you get to these other environments, like a big company or a national lab, where the team work is much more common, but the individual recognition is not sometimes as present. Can you guys tell us a little bit about that? And maybe Robert, can I bounce that back to you? What is that right? And then if so, what does that feel like to have a more indistinct kind of or unrecognized role?
I'll say that we encourage our young scientists to publish.
Even in business?
In business.
Oh, we'll talk about that at our webinar next month. That'll be kind of interesting to hook back onto that conversation.
But it's largely for their careers.
Why is that?
There's a little bit of marketing value in being able to point and say, yeah, our company's doing this valuable research.
And look how valuable it is. It's peer reviewed and
right. So there's a little bit of value to our marketing department in publishing. But really the reason we do it is because the young scientists want to publish.
Sure.
And they want to build up their resumes.
Right.
Either for a career in our company or because, they see some future career, they may want to go back to academia at some point and they need to have publications behind them. And so it's largely as a perk to the young scientists to let them publish. By the time they get to be middle-aged, they lose interest.
Crystal, do you want to make a comment in all this?
Yes, I just wanted to add one thing to what Robert just said, that a lot of times I get asked, about people who go into industry and then later go into academia. And some of the biggest, most consistent advice I've heard from people, and yes, people do that all the time. It's not
people
super
do go back, yeah.
It can be done. But the advice I heard, the reason that they were able to do that is because they kept their publication habit up while in industry. So maybe that's another reason to want to do that, is if they have aspirations.
Yeah, so the skills don't atrophy.
Yeah, and it's just good for their CV, and yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. So that is interesting that you can still have individual contribution. Yeah, Robert, and anything else?
I'll just make, when I was at AFRL working in a government lab, publishing was much more important.
Interesting. Okay.
Because there was an understanding that we work for the taxpayers You know, certainly nothing classified, but if we were doing research that might be of use to the public, we would encourage people to publish it because we work for the taxpayers. And so I'd say on the government side, certainly I think there's much more institutional support for publishing than there is in industry.
Very interesting. Yoon, I want to draw you into this conversation. Do you still see opportunities to publish in the environment where you're working?
Yeah, before I answer that, you know, the students who are listening to this thing, I mean, publication is like your stock. It's like a currency. Mm-hmm. So even if you like go from academia to like an industry, you know, if you put your resume in, you know, if you have those publications, I mean, they count a lot. You know, you can say a lot during like description of your job, like you did this, you did that, but nothing counts more than a publication. So if you're a student, I would, you know, pay attention to that. And my role as a, you know, sort of the sort of in a PM sort of role, you know, publication is almost non-existent. But you know, I have you know, chance to collaborate with some of the former colleagues to keep publishing. I just published one past, you know, 2020. So it is something that I'm still active, and I like to stay active. So you don't have to actually do a lab work to do a publication. So there are other ways around it. So just because you go to industry, it means it's over. You know, there's still ways around it. You know, physics people are smart. They'll find a way.
Yeah, that's good. That's a very good point. It's a very good point. So looking at some other questions here, somebody else asks, is it generally the case that jobs in government and jobs in industry involve more applied work than, you know, academia? Would you say that's a truism, Dawn?
Yes.
And yeah, Dawn and Robert are nodding, et cetera. Yeah, I'd also say that's typically the case. Yeah. And you know, I found that sometimes even applied problems somehow link back to some very interesting fundamental stuff. And so it's not always the case that it's a linear path from basic science to applied science to, you know, pilot, product, et cetera. Sometimes you can still be wrestling with basic things that are fundamental physics.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody else asks, how important is it for doing a postdoc for if your trajectory is into industry? Can you tell us kind of what role a postdoc can play, or when is a postdoc not necessary? I'll start with you, Dawn.
It does depend on where you're going in industry. I think a postdoc isn't necessary if you're going into something that's going to be somewhat different. For me, the postdoc was helpful because it was my first job at NIST, and so it led to my second job at NIST.
Ah, okay. Entry-level position, as it were. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So if you're going to get a permanent job at NIST, it really helps to just start out with a postdoc at NIST.
Yeah, Robert, you're nodding as well. What are your thoughts on postdocs?
Well, I was a postdoc at NIST, and you know, there are about 30 postdocs across NIST at any time, and a couple of them will get permanent offers to become positions. Many of them are hoping for it, including me, and some of them get it, including Dawn.
So actually, and I'll echo that, at the national labs, I would say that it is one of the most common pathways into a staff position in a national lab is to have been a postdoc at a national lab.
They use it as a 2-year-long interview process.
Sure. Yoon, do you see the postdoc as a step that's valuable if you're moving into the sort of the work that you do?
You know, everybody goes through a postdoc. Fortunately, I didn't have to do a postdoc, but you know, it's one of those things like, you know, you pay like a dirt cheap, you know, labor cost, and you do work twice as much because it's literally, somebody just said it's a 2-year interview process. I don't know why the system is set up that way, but also you have to also figure out that, you know, the other party doesn't know how hard you work or, you know, what you're capable of. So it takes time. I mean, the resume doesn't really tell you. So they have to sort of watch you and say, hey, you know, can you do things? Can you move stuff? You know, so it's like, you know, a trial period. So you're making it, you know, it's a tryout.
Say in the South. Can this
right.
dog
And
hunt?
And as somebody said, for national lab, that is like the sort of the trial period to make sure that, you know, that before they hire, they look at you and they watch you.
Yeah, Crystal, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I would like to just add a small thing, based on my experience from talking about this topic a lot throughout the years that I've been at APS. And I guess the one thing, I think one point that's really important that needs to be made here, and that I've heard lots of times,
Mhm.
it might be different for industry careers that are in this particular direction, like in all of your areas of expertise, but more broadly. And I've noticed we've had a few questions about industry more broadly.
Mhm.
I have heard from employers, at least in industry, it is not required to do a postdoc. It's not the same as you've kind of grown up expecting that, in order to have a good career, you need to be prepared to do your PhD, postdoc, but
Sorry.
as Yun said, yeah, yes, postdocs are a great experience. And if you're on a very specific career trajectory that specifically needs that postdoc, like the
Yeah.
one that they described, going into national labs,
Yeah.
that's a good reason to do it. But you are getting paid a third of what you would be worth if you went straight into industry with your PhD.
Interesting.
Yes, and it's not at all required. And in fact, what I've heard from some industry employers is that if they look at your resume and they see three or God forbid four, I mean, like even three postdoc positions on your resume, they're going to be concerned.
But you're not kind of getting escape velocity or something? Yeah.
Yeah, that maybe your reason for going into
Yeah.
industry is that academia didn't work out for you, or maybe they're
Yeah.
worried that you've been in the
Yeah.
culture just a little bit too
Yeah.
long. I just
Interesting.
had to
Robert?
add that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Robert, you were going to raise your hand and say something.
I just want to, I don't disagree with any of that, but one counterpoint is that when you look at a new PhD resume, you don't know that it wasn't just their advisor's work.
Sure.
And so if I see a resume where they did a postdoc and they did something very different than they did as a PhD and were successful at it, that tells me, okay, this person is able to do this. It's not just that they were riding a good wagon
Sure.
to grad school.
Yeah, that adaptability. Yun, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I can also add, also the counterpoint is that, okay, so the postdoc, I mean, as bad as it might be, if you don't do it and go to industry, it's a one-way ticket. You can't reverse it. If you don't do a postdoc, if you go to industry, there's no really going back to academia is really, really hard. If you do a postdoc and go to industry, there's a chance that you could still come back to academia because you have this experience of doing independent sort of research. You prove that you can, be an independent researcher. That kind of was proven at a postdoc level. So it got to be very judicious about choices, right? Sure. You don't want to do like 3 postdocs or 4 postdocs. That kind of shows you like, you're not very marketable. But you don't want to like not do it. Then you kind of make the choice on your career path. So there's a little fine line you walk.
I've heard some other really interesting and specific advantages or reasons to consider a postdoc. One, I met some people who wanted to physically relocate to another location where they felt they would be in a richer job environment eventually. And so they took a postdoc in that area because they wanted to physically then kind of situate themselves closer to the ultimate jobs they wanted. The other thing is, as you said, Robert, is that a postdoc can be a great opportunity to demonstrate your adaptability or your flexibility. Because of course, a PhD stands for piled higher and deeper. You get a very narrow field and expertise, and a postdoc can show your ability to flex into an adjacent topic. And so sometimes a postdoc can be very powerful to move you intellectually from, say, one field to another field and to get you qualified in that field. So those are great points. Crystal, did you want to say anything else?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, yes, of course, I don't think anyone in industry would say that it counts against you to get a postdoc. I mean, that's a bad thing. Like you said, Robert, that's a really good point to kind of distinguish yourself from your advisor's work. It's just something I've heard over and over again. And I know lots and lots of people who have gone into industry very successfully without having done postdocs. So
okay.
Just wanted
I've got a great final question for all of us to talk about. Somebody writes, so somebody who is new going into an entry-level position and you see their resume, what would you want to see that would cause that person to stand out? Otherwise, a good physics PhD, but what are the standout characteristics that you would want to see in entry-level position, applying for their first job? Don, what do you think?
So I've been surprised when I've been sitting in the room at my big company discussing somebody we just interviewed. Well, I was surprised to see how much they were not so tuned into caring about how brilliant this person advertised himself as being, not so tuned into how hardworking this person advertised himself as being, but whether you could work with them. And I remember once somebody who told a great story about how brilliant they were and how hardworking they were. The first thing the other colleague said was, that person would be a nightmare to manage.
Interesting.
So
How do you project that as a grad student? What things do you say?
So what they're getting at is the working with teams to meet a goal. And that is leadership of a team is something that you might not see from a newly minted PhD. They have been somebody who's been toiling away in the lab by themselves. They've been given a narrow thing and been toiling away maybe by themselves in the lab.
Yeah.
So maybe they got something handed to them. It's anything that shows that you can see a problem for yourself, work with other people, and to reach a goal effectively. And there's a variety of ways of doing that, but that's what the interview committee is often looking for.
Okay, very good. Robert, did you have any other thoughts, like the new entry-level position? What is that special sauce that you might
So I look for dirty fingernails.
Excellent.
I look for somebody who
smell of WD-40 and Snoop.
Fixes their own car, hangs out at Home Depot, recognizes that, a piece of copper pipe from Home Depot can do that just as well as the thing from the lab supply company. Is going to come up with creative solutions because they took apart their refrigerator to try and fix it themselves. I'm looking for somebody who wants to get their hands dirty.
Resourceful, hands-on, interesting, problem solver. Very interesting.
Yeah. And the second thing I would add, the turnoff for me is, I spent 3 years deciding trying to get an academic job, and then I decided to settle for a job in industry.
Settle. Ooh, yeah.
They don't say that out loud.
Yeah.
You can hear it in their voice.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, if you hire one of those people, a couple years later, they're going to be really unhappy because not only are they not doing what they wanted to do, but the thing they wanted to do is slipping away from them. Every day they get up and go into work and aren't getting closer to academia or writing a paper or whatever they need, just frustrates them more and more. Yeah. And so those situations never turn out well. So I'm
in other words,
for somebody who wants to be in
people
industry.
who want to be there, people who have a good reason for wanting to be where. That's interesting. Very good advice.
Dirty fingernails, and I can usually see the dirty fingernails on their resumes.
Yeah, Crystal. Before I was going to ask Yun for his comment, but anything before I move on?
Yeah, really quickly, I just have to say what Dawn said really resonated with me, and it matches what I've heard from a lot of different people. And Matthew Thompson did an amazing webinar for us earlier in late last year as part of this series called Teamwork in Industry. And he talks about the exact thing that you said, Dawn, about emotional intelligence versus intellectual, like that exactly what you said, that you could be the most brilliant person ever, but if you can't demonstrate that people can work with you, it's going to diminish your chances.
Very interesting. Yun, we are almost at the top of our hour. Do you have any last advice or comments about what stands out for entry-level applicants?
Yeah, so it's not for those people who excel in academia, you'll get hired anywhere. But for people who are struggling like rest of us, have your, the personality show. I mean, show some teamwork kind of thing, sports, anything. We just don't want another nerd. We want somebody that can work with other people because physicists aren't known for their personality. So please show that on a resume.
Very good. Well, listen, I think that was a great exchange. I want to thank you guys so much for this wonderful, lively conversation. Turning it back to Crystal to wrap us up for the hour.
Okay, great. Thank you, Peter, for leading this great discussion. And thank you to our panelists, and especially Yun. I know that it's definitely a little bit of an ordeal. So yes, we have great questions coming in, but this is all the time we have. We apologize if we didn't get to your questions. You can follow up with an email to webinars@aps.org, and we will see if we can get your questions answered. Just a quick reminder that this has all been recorded, and so we will be sending that link to that recording out to everyone who registered for this event. It will also be posted on YouTube eventually on our webinars channel. But it'll take us about 48 hours to upload that and get all that sorted out. I also wanted to let people know that I did drop a link in the chat. If you would be so kind as to take a moment to just click on that link and give us a little bit of feedback on this presentation.
Yeah, help us make these webinars even better. And
yeah,
the advice you give us will only make it stronger for other students behind you. So please do that for us.
Yes, thank you very much. And we would appreciate if you did that. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off.
And the atomic clock says it is time for us to go. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
American Physical Society, copyright 2021, all rights reserved.
Thanks. Bye-bye.